Prior to commencing, I wish to caution you that this narrative encompasses serious subjects addressing the difficulties of novelty, motherhood, familial ties, and infidelity. If these subjects induce discomfort, you may wish to discontinue. I am currently watching. My name is Bray Schuffer, and I am 42 years old. My current life may be deemed unusual, however, I have come to accept it as it is. Had you informed me? If someone had told me a decade ago that my life would develop in this manner, I would likely have laughed and disregarded it as absurd. Such a joke I would have never believed. Here I am seated at my kitchen table. In the tranquil morning, my mind wanders as I gaze at a partially filled cup of coffee. I am attempting to reconstruct the events of the past decade in quest of significance in all that has transpired, yet it has been challenging to comprehend everything. For the previous 8 years, it has only been my son and myself. Maximus. Since the divorce, we have been navigating life as a couple, as though the entire universe is acting against us. Recall the inception of events when his father departed. Maximus Wasley, 10. At that age, he did not display any emotion in my presence. He never does yet. I could perceive it in the nuanced manner in which she conducted herself. I could discern it in the silent, yearning glances he would direct forth. He gazed out the window as though anticipating his father's return, despite an underlying awareness that it was unlikely to occur. Daily, he would await, and each day I had to observe the gradual onset of disappointment. His expression solidified upon his father's absence. The day his father departed, I vowed to myself that I would remain steadfast. At that moment, I resolved to do everything was necessary to ensure Maximus never experienced. In solitude, I would serve as the singular constant in his existence, ensuring he experienced the warmth and comfort of familial bonds, even if it was merely the two of us. That vow has constituted the cornerstone of all my subsequent endeavors, motivates me even on the most challenging days. It has not always been simple, but I have endeavored to cultivate a sense of steadiness to provide him with the love and support he requires whatever of the challenges imposed by the world. For an extended while, I genuinely believed I was successfully maintaining control over matters. Maximus was a very kind child, while Ken was notably reserved, often seeking opportunities to assist me with household tasks. There was an inherent gentleness about him that distinguished him from others. Even among his peers as he matured, circumstances began to change, to undergo transformations that I could not entirely comprehend. And if I am being entirely, honestly, I can envision myself undergoing a transformation as well. Maximus reached the age of 18 this year, which signifies a pivotal moment. In some respects, it was a significant milestone for both of us. He is no longer a child. At times I contemplate that he remains on the verge of comprehending what it genuinely signifies to be a man. The transformation is not always evident, and I observe that he is grappling with it. He has consistently exhibited a degree of reserve even as he was relaxed and never felt the necessity to be in the constant company of other children. Actively pursued the boisterous encounters associated with his classmates. Yet he seldom ventures out, favoring in the tranquility of his house. He lacks strong friendships contrary to what one may anticipate for a young individual. I have attempted to discuss the matter with him to ascertain whether there was any understanding. There is an issue if he is experiencing feelings of loneliness or disorientation. Yet whenever I mention it, he merely dismisses my concerns with a nonchalant, "I'm fine, but I." A mother possesses an innate understanding of her child, often perceiving their true state despite attempts to conceal it. Approximately a month ago, Maximus persuaded Hero to reconsider a matter that I was unable to influence. I had anticipated something for which I was entirely unprepared to hear. It was late in the evening. It was just the two of us in the living room. when he unexpectedly revealed himself in a manner I had not previously witnessed. He informed me that he had been utilizing my belongings, specifically my underpants. Initially, I was utterly perplexed. I comprehended his meaning. Initially, my mind struggled to grasp it, but eventually the realization dawned on me. The entirety of his message seemed as if the ground beneath me had just vanished. My heart accelerated. My breath constricted in my chest. I yearned to cry out too. I wanted to inquire about his thought process that led him to believe it was acceptable, but I refrained from doing so. I remained motionless, observing him. He appeared diminutive in that context, moment of profound shame and severe embarrassment. His gaze was directed downward, evading contact. His posture was slumped in a manner that evoked sympathy for him, the youngster who had once ready to assist and imbued with gentle kindness. She now sat there, encumbered by an indefinable weight. Understand? And in that moment I recognized something. This was not solely about his conduct. It encompassed much deeper implications. The shock and rage I experienced were indicative of a more profound issue, an emotion he had never been able to explain. It was a matter he could not articulate verbally. It pertained to his internal conflict. His perplexity, loneliness, and dread rendered me powerless, leaving me to merely observe, endeavoring to comprehend not only the particulars of the incident, but also the subdued, terrible emotion she bore, which he had not yet mastered to articulate. He was neither a deviant, nor he was my son grappling with his emotions. She was overwhelmed by an uncontrollable yearning that I could not bring myself to fulfill. He felt worse than he already did, prompting him to make a decision. I struck a bargain with him, informed him that he may proceed as necessary, but there would be regulations to follow. He needed to relieve himself, but he had to do it in my presence to ensure his safety, and that he was not crossing any boundaries. I informed him that I would bring whoever I desired inside the house in exchange for additional lines. Absent his inquiry or evaluation, it was not an ideal resolution, however it did. He was the one individual that came to mind at that moment. Since then, circumstances have altered, and Maximus appears more at ease now. Hessel is less anxious. He does not engage in much conversation, yet he no longer evades my presence as he once did. I have begun to see that this arrangement is not solely about him. It provides me with the independence I have long desired to navigate my life without the necessity of cautiously avoiding him at times. At night I ponder whether I made the correct decision and contemplate others' opinions. They might consider me a poor mother or a failure if they were aware. They would, but they are unfamiliar with Maximus. They do not comprehend the experience of witnessing you're a youngster in distress, unaware of how to alleviate their suffering, without the understanding of what it is to struggle to maintain composure under turmoil. We are collectively striving to maintain cohesion. I am uncertain about our future and whether this will endure, whether the agreement will be sustainable in the long term, or if it is merely a precarious situation poised to implode. Proceed, but for the present, this is our existence. This is our selection. Despite its chaotic and intricate nature, I am exerting my utmost effort for him. If you are still with me, please remember to like and share this video. Share your ideas in the comments, and subscribe for other narratives like this. There is much more to explore. Discovering the arrangement was unanticipated and not part of my considerations. In an instant, I was seated attempting to determine how to communicate with Maximus regarding what he conveyed to me and the subsequent words. Words were escaping my lips, as if they have autonomy. You may continue, I stated, but I require some. He regarded me as though I had just communicated in an unfamiliar language. His face turned pale and his hands squeezed into fists on the kitchen table momentarily. I anticipated that he would rise and exit, Perhaps I desired this outcome, or perhaps I hoped he would refuse and articulate his thoughts. I was irrational and stormed out of the room, but he remained there staring at me with his mouth opening and shutting. He was at a loss for words. "What do you mean?" he finally inquired, his voice trembling. He was silent, uncertain if he genuinely desired to know the answer. I inhaled deeply, continued to breathe, but only in my presence and in exchange I receive. To live my life as I choose, I can invite anyone into my home without your commentary or criticism. We each obtain what we require, yet a prolonged hush ensued thereafter. Maximus remained silent, merely gazing at me with a furrowed brow and pursed lips. Pressed into a tiny line, I could discern that he was struggling to comprehend what I had just articulated. I was attempting to comprehend it. I was engaged in the same activity, and the words were available. Now suspended in the atmosphere between us, I could not retract my words. Not that I was certain I desired to. Ultimately, he acquiesced with a nod. Hardly perceptible, he remarked in a voice so faint that I did not hear it, "If that is your desire," and thus concluded the agreement. During the initial occurrence, I believed I was going to vomit. I positioned myself on the edge of my bed, my heart racing in my chest, my palm perspiring. I reassured myself that he required something superior to the alternative, and although I was undertaking this for him, I was acutely aware that it was not. It is never that simple. Maximus entered the room, his gaze fixed on the mug. He remained silent, as did I. We avoided making eye contact, remained seated, feigning ignorance, as if this were merely another occurrence. It was an ordinary day, and by its conclusion, he departed without uttering a word. I remained motionless after a considerable duration. I remained seated, gazing at the wall, attempting to persuade myself. I reassured myself that everything was acceptable. It is peculiar, the circumstances. Initially, it seemed like a gut hit, but over time it became more manageable, or perhaps I simply acclimated. I became more adept at feigning indifference, convincing myself that it was not causing harm, and that it was merely unconventional. I was pragmatically optimizing a disadvantageous circumstance for a period. Conversely, Maximus was perceived differently, embodying animosity in his actions. All appeared well, however I saw the shame and remorse in his eyes. He never articulated it. Boisterous, yet I recognized his self-loathing for requiring me in every. Each time I observed that expression on his face, it shattered my heart a little farther. But what was I expected, to abandon him? He was my son, my sole offspring. I could not forsake him. I could not permit him to succumb to his own emotions while I remained passive, so I acted as I typically do, maintained a courageous demeanor, and persevered for him regarding Maferis. I am uncertain if I am. Most days I'm uncertain about what constitutes the appropriate action. We no longer seek alternatives. This is our current reality, the life we have constructed, and for the time being it suffices. It must. Initially, there was little distinction. Maximus adhered to the established schedule. It may be referred to as such, occurring once in the morning and occasionally again in the evening. It was not foreseeable yet. It was controllable. I reassured myself that this was merely a phase. He would eventually lose interest as the novelty diminished, but instead of decelerating, it initially accelerated gradually in the morning, transformed into an afternoon, subsequently into a night, followed by 2 consecutive mornings. I began to see how swiftly the hours of the day revolved around this arrangement, resulting in fewer intervals of normalcy, less instances when the atmosphere inside the residence did not feel laden with what. We had reached an agreement, however I endeavored to disregard it, relegating it to the recesses of my mind. Yet it perpetually lingered like a shadow. The initial moment I experienced discomfort was while I was folding laundry. Maximus entered silently, his visage taut, and his body language stiff. Stiff, I anticipated his desires before he articulated them. I placed the garments down and seated myself at the edge of the couch. Awaiting his completion, I saw a deviation. He did not merely depart this time. Upon its conclusion, he hesitated, gazing at me as if attempting to convey a message, yet was unable to articulate it. Discover the words that encapsulated the gravity of the moment I experienced in my gut. Pressing down on me like a stone, I said softly, "Are you all right?" Than I expected. He nodded, but I saw in his eyes that this was no longer about relief. That night, I experienced something profound. I was unable to sleep as I gazed at the ceiling, replaying events in my mind. I repeatedly relived the day in my memory, admonishing myself not to overanalyze it. I was deluding myself, yet intrinsically I understood that this was not merely a means for he could no longer cope. It was becoming a must for him. Initially, the most frightening aspect was my uncertainty regarding how to halt it in the ensuing days. Maximus's behavior subsequently intensified as he ceased efforts to conceal it, ceased anticipating opportune moments. It appeared he disregarded bounds. It seemed as though the agreement we established granted him unrestricted freedom to act as he pleased. He could do so at his discretion, possibly because I had granted him the liberty to do so. I did not intend to tease him the first time. It was an accident while I was in the kitchen. While preparing dinner, I sensed his gaze upon me as I navigated the kitchen. His gaze tracked my every movement. I am not of my motivations. Perhaps I desired to alleviate the strain, or perhaps I was assessing his limits. Nevertheless, without contemplation, I removed my jacket, allowing it to drop upon the counter, causing his breath to catch. I turned to confront him, a slight smile playing at the corner of my mouth. "Is something amiss?" I inquired, feigning ignorance of the manner in which his cheeks reddened. He did not respond. He merely turned and exited the room. However, I could sense the burden of his look lingered long after his departure. Subsequently, it transformed into a game I would play. Elevate my hair and allow my shirt to rise somewhat, perhaps a tad excessively. Jeans unbuttoned, little too long. Nothing elucidated it, nothing explicit, just sufficient to induce discomfort in him. I hesitated before turning away. It imparted a peculiar sense of control, a power I possessed, had not experienced in years, and I despised how much I appreciated it. Yet with each passing, on that day the boundary between us became increasingly indistinct as he began to pursue my company more actively, frequently seeking justifications to be in proximity to me, despite the absence of necessity for either of us. Convinced myself it was innocuous and devoid of significance, although the reality was that I was uncertain of its meaning and of anything else. There was a time, late one, in the evening when everything culminated. Maximus was seated opposite me in the living room, his gaze intently directed at me. I read a book that was packed with palpable tension, the kind that made my skin tingle and my heart race as I gazed on. I met his gaze, and for the first time I did not avert my eyes. Neither did he. The tension stretched between us, oppressive and stifling, until I finally cleared my throat and rose up. "I'm going to bed," I stated, my voice barely audible. Above a whisper, I sensed his gaze upon me. I walked away, uncertain of how we arrived at this point. I am perplexed by how I let it to escalate to this extent. Yet here we are, ensnared in a cycle. I'm uncertain about how to disengage, and despite my want to believe I remain in charge, I cannot dispel the sensation that I have already forfeited it till Enrique Franklin became a part of our lives. Everything began to disintegrate when I encountered him through a mutual acquaintance, one of those informal contacts that you seldom contemplate deeply. Initially, it was uncertain, but Enrique was not the type of man one could quickly forget. Exuded charm effortlessly, as if he did not need to exert effort to elicit a smile from you. He possessed a chuckle that filled the room, sweet and disarming, making me feel lighter, perhaps for the first time. Over the years, I gradually lowered my defenses as Enrique began visiting more frequently. First, it was merely for dinner or a drink. He initially occupied the back porch, but soon began to linger in the living room after Maximus had withdrawn to his chamber. On one occasion, he remained the entire night, and I did not attempt to conceal this from Maximus. That was not included in our agreement. Nonetheless, I could not disregard the expression on his face. Confront the subsequent morning when he observed Henry seated at the kitchen table, leisurely sipping coffee as though it had existed for years. It was subtle, yet I was enough acquainted with my son to discern the underlying tension. His jaw clenched as his hand gripped his plate just too tightly. Initially challenging, Maximus remained silent, merely observing from the periphery. Morose and despondent, yet as the weeks progressed, Enrique's presence in our home intensified. His stillness increasingly transformed into something more acute. He began to snap at others. Me over minor issues, overlooked tasks, unmatched socks, and inconsequential irritations appeared to assume a life of its own. I attempted to dismiss it, convincing myself it was merely his manner of. While adjusting, I sensed the hatred intensifying between us. And oppressive like a tempest poised to erupt one evening, as Enrique and I sat in the Maximus, entered the room observing the couch, and giggling at something trivial. Initially, it remained silent, observing us with an expression I could not really comprehend. Upon looking up and meeting his gaze, I perceived the pain and the fury. Confusion that had been simmering for weeks before I could articulate anything. He spoke in a low voice, and trembling he asked, "Do you even care anymore?" His words sliced through the air like a knife as Enrique gazed at me. Startled, I maintained my gaze on Maximus. "What are you discussing?" "About?" I inquired, my voice unwavering despite my beating heart as he stepped closer, fists clenched at his sides, asserting that you are indifferent to me and to our relationship. The impact of our actions on me rendered the room silent. Ricky refrained from moving while I gradually stood up, my chest constricted as I searched. Maximus's expression indicated a want for clarification. "Maximus." "That is not accurate," I stated. He replied softly, "Of course I care about you." But then his voice escalated as he retorted, "How is any of this acceptable? You allowed this individual to intrude into our life as if it were inconsequential. You sit there and laugh with him as if I do not exist." I felt the air leave my lungs. Words impacted me more profoundly than anticipated. "Maximus," I stated while extending my hand towards him. Nevertheless, he withdrew before I could make contact. "I was unaware that you harbored such feelings," I remarked. "Certainly you did not," he remarked with bitterness. "You are preoccupied with your liberty? Or do you still perceive me? Or have I become insignificant to you?" The ensuing silence was overwhelmingly profound. Enrique shifted uneasily on the couch, murmuring something about. As I provided space before exiting, I scarcely observed anything save my son standing there terrified. The feelings I had neglected for an extended period that night following Maximus's outburst. After he went to his room, I sat alone in the living room gazing at the vacant coffee table. The cup Enrique abandoned echoed his words in my mind repeatedly. Each incision penetrated slightly deeper than the preceding one. He was correct. I had not been. I had been preoccupied with attempting to resolve this matter regarding him, endeavored to persuade myself that all was well, neglecting to consider the implications of my actions. Upon encountering him, I experienced for the first time in an extended period the profound implications of my decisions, particularly the agreement I had forged with Maximus. The limits we transcended and the lines we obscured were not solely about us. It was no longer about our past, but rather about our transformation and the destruction we were causing. I did not sleep that night, merely sat there gazing at the door, contemplating whether a solution remained or if it was already irreparable. Late the day following our dispute, the home was disquietingly. Maximus remained silent in his room, the door shut, and the atmosphere dense within. I sat at the kitchen table, gazing at my coffee as the steam curled upward. It loomed like a fog obscuring my thoughts, and I could no longer disregard it. I had to take action regardless of what this situation was or how our relationship had evolved. It could not continue in this manner, neither for him nor for me. Later that day, I knocked on his door. First, there was no response, but I waited, pushing my forehead against the Maximus. I require a discussion over the wooden frame. I sighed gently at last. The door creaked open, revealing him with a wary expression. My eyes, encircled by fatigue, conveyed my remorse as I said, my voice quivering, "I apologize for everything, for not recognizing the extent of your pain and allowing circumstances to escalate this far. I was mistaken." His demeanor? He did not yield quickly, but he stepped aside to permit my entry. I perched on the side of his bed, while he reclined against the wall, arms crossed across his chest. "We require assistance," I stated. Both of us acknowledged I can no longer maintain this facade. I am aware of my actions, and I cannot allow us to continue on this path. I have made numerous mistakes on this route, but I wish to rectify them. If permitted, Maximus first remained silent, merely nodding, while his eyes was fixed on. A few days later, we were seated in a small office opposite Rafael Cabrera, a family therapist. I discovered online that Rafael was a benevolent individual, exhibiting a composed and stable personality, provided a sense of security despite initial reluctance to engage in conversation from both parties. We remained silent, the burden of our narrative too profound to articulate. However, Raphael possessed a unique ability to penetrate that quiet by posing inquiries that were less intrusive and more like as invites were extended. Maximus gradually began to reveal his thoughts, discussing the loneliness he had experienced confusion over our agreement, and the emotions that had been accumulating within him since the divorce. I listened to him, tears flowing down my cheeks as I heard him speak. Emotions I had neglected for an extended period in the weeks subsequent to therapy integrated into our schedule. It was challenging, with days when we departed the office seems more depleted than when we came, raising questions about whether we were genuinely advancing, although gradually the barriers between us started to diminish. Raphael assisted us in establishing definitive boundaries. I informed Maximus of our agreement. It was concluded that it had been a mistake and that we needed to commence anew. Initially, it encountered difficulties. There were instances when I observed him reverting to previous behaviors due to his frustration, erupting into wrath or sadness. Although with Raphael's guidance, we Maximus discovered healthier coping mechanisms and commenced journaling, an endeavor he decided to undertake. Enrolled at a local martial arts class, he discovered an outlet for his feelings. Gradually, I observed him. He elevated his posture, articulated with greater confidence, and commenced allocating additional time outside the home to cultivate ties that were not reliant on me was the most challenging aspect. Confronting my true self through therapy compelled me to examine the decisions I had made and the manner in which my worries and insecurities had influenced my relationship with Maximus. I had invested much time attempting to retain him to fulfill the emptiness created by the divorce obscured my perception of how it was stifling us both. Relinquishing that power and learning to believing that he could be self-sufficient was one of the most challenging experiences I have ever encountered. One evening, several months after our initial therapy session, Maximus and I were seated on the balcony observing the sunset. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he glanced at me and expressed, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." It was not substantial, yet it sufficed. I extended my hand and grasped his, a simple gesture that conveyed meaning. Volumes devoid of verbal expression. We are still navigating complexities. Healing is not linear. It is convoluted and complex, and fraught with obstacles. However, for the first time in an extended period, I experience. Hopeful Maximus is navigating his path, as am I, and although we may never completely rectify the errors we have committed, we are acquiring the skills to progress collectively. Life does not provide a manual, and had I done so, I likely would have discarded mine long ago. Maximus and I have endured more than I ever anticipated, yet we remain resilient and continue to strive forward. The house now feels distinct, perhaps lighter, as I continue to learn. The tranquility derived from the realization that we are ultimately striving for improvement. Maxim has established his stability, allocates additional time to socializing with friends, and prioritizing personal interests. When our paths intersect, it feels as though we are encountering one another as distinct individuals rather than as a pair. Individuals ensnared in a convoluted configuration that we did not entirely comprehend, which we still possess. Our times of healing are not flawless, although there has been improvement for me. In the process of self-reflection, I have had to cultivate the ability to forgive my own errors in order to release them. Release the guilt that has burdened me for an extended period. I must acknowledge that I cannot always rectify situations, and at times, the most beneficial action you can take for a loved one is to withdraw and let them to resolve their own issues. Achieving this has not been facile. Nevertheless, I take pride in the advancements we have accomplished, not alone as a mother and son, but as two individuals endeavoring to reestablish mutual respect and confidence. The key takeaway from this is the significance of boundaries. They are not merely regulations. They are manifestations of affection, both for those in your vicinity and for others. They are how you safeguard what is significant, while also permitting space for growth and understanding, and connection has taught me that accountability is equally significant. Forgiveness sometimes entails the challenging admission of one's errors, yet it is simultaneously the most liberating act. To everybody listening, I wish to convey that mistakes do not define you. Rather, what characterizes you is what actions you take following a setback, how you regain your composure, and how you confront those you have wronged. Progress is not predicated on perfection. Rather, it hinges on the willingness to embrace change, especially in the face of fear. Even with the pain, Maximus and I are still navigating our circumstances, and I believe wheelways will remain as they are. Such is life. However, for the first time in an extended period, I experience a sense of feeling. As if we are on firm foundation, we are constructing something superior, healthier, and I'm confident we will progress together. However, I wish to hear your thoughts. What would you do if your world disintegrated as mine did? Please indicate in the comments if you wish to proceed, and whether this narrative resonated with you. If you experience any emotions, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for additional content.